In this series, we've been talking about things that are toxic. And by that we mean anything that contains poisonous material that's capable of causing sickness or even death. And here's the thing, even relationships can be toxic. There are people around us who can wield a poisonous influence in our lives. We need to be aware of that, and we need to know how to protect ourselves against that. The way we protect ourselves, we're going to see today, is by setting healthy boundaries to limit the influence of people's toxic relationships in our lives. And it's not just so we can be happy or that we can be satisfied or for selfish motives, but it's so that we have the emotional energy to pursue our highest purpose in life, which is to pursue God and to help other people pursue Him. So first of all, I want you to know that the Bible warns about toxic relationships. To be honest, there are some relationships that just aren't good for you, that just aren't healthy. Proverbs 13 verse 20 warns us, walk with the wise and become wise, associate with fools and get in trouble. So you see, who you hang out with will affect you for better or for worse. And then in 1 Corinthians 15 it says, don't be fooled by people who say such things, for bad company corrupts good character. He says, don't be misled, don't be fooled about certain relationships, because some people can have a corrupting influence, a toxic or corrupting influence in our lives. And then in 2 Timothy chapter 2, he gives us a very vivid word picture. It says, avoid worthless, foolish talk that only leads to more godless behavior. This kind of talk spreads like cancer. So you see that the effect of bad relationships can be like cancer. Now, he's not trying to minimize the seriousness of cancer, but he's trying to warn us about the gravity of certain kinds of relationships where negative elements can spread and spread illness and even death in certain ways, in moral and spiritual ways in people's lives, unless they're confined and contained. So the Bible warns us about toxic relationships. Now, what kinds of relationships are toxic? There's a lot of different things we could say, but I want to encourage you today to be careful about three kinds of toxic people. We all have people in our lives who leave us emotionally exhausted, and they make us feel worse about ourselves and about our lives. They leave us drained and distracted from what really matters in life. First, there's the negative person. They're always criticizing, always complaining and backbiting. They're griping, they're gossiping. Nothing is ever good enough for them. They're always blaming someone else. And then secondly, there's the controller. That's the person who's overbearing and demanding. Their agenda is to get their way. And so they might use just the force of their will and kind of bully you emotionally. Or they might manipulate and just know how to push the buttons to make you feel guilty. And then there's the tempter. The tempter, just the person who doesn't even care about your values. And so they're happy if you just go along with them. And they want what they want, and they either consciously or unconsciously want you to go along with us. Now, the reason that these people are toxic is not just because they make us unhappy. It's not about happiness. Our greatest purpose in life is not just to be happy, but it's to pursue God and help other people pursue God. And these kind of people then just leave us drained and exhausted, so we don't have the energy, we don't have the attention to really focus on growing in our relationship and helping other people grow. And so they make it harder to trust in Jesus. They make it harder to live to honor God. They make it harder to help people pursue God. So having identified these three kind of people that we need to be careful about, then how do we protect ourselves? What do we do about that? I want you to know that there's two simple ways to respond to toxic relationships. You see, people don't always manage toxic relationships very well. Some of us are appeasers, and we want to be liked so much that it's hard for us to tell that person the truth. And others of us are fixers, and we take more responsibility for the person's problem than they do, and we, over time, become enmeshed in that relationship far too long. But instead, then, principle number one is to set healthy boundaries. A boundary is just simply a fence where you say, you limit the behavior of the other person by telling them, communicating what's acceptable and what isn't. It's a fence that keeps the good stuff in and the bad stuff out. And in fact, Jesus set boundaries with his followers. So there's a good example for us in Mark chapter 1. Before daybreak the next morning, Jesus got up and went out to an isolated place to pray. Later, Simon and the others went to find him. When they found him, they said, everyone is looking for you. Now, the night before, Jesus had been healing a bunch of people. He got up early and went away to pray. When they found him, they wanted him to come back and do some more healing. But Jesus set boundaries in order to fulfill his priorities, boundaries on other people's expectations so that he could fulfill his priorities, like being alone with God. And there are two simple practical boundaries that I want you to learn how to set. Number one is to be able to say, I'm not going to let you talk to me or treat me that way. And so if it's the negative person, I'm not going to let you talk to me with your complaining and blaming. Or if it's the controlling person, I'm not going to let you talk to me with that emotional bullying. And then the second boundary is, I'm not going there with you. And so again, if it's the negative person, say, I'm not going to join you in your gossip, in your backbiting. Or if it's the tempting person, say, I'm not going to participate in that activity with you. So set healthy boundaries. Now, setting boundaries may not seem like a loving thing to do. It may seem selfish, but really it's very loving because it helps that other person have the opportunity to grow. And sometimes toxic people have never had anyone in their life who's willing to care enough to lovingly set a boundary for their behavior. So that's principle number one, set healthy boundaries. Number two is to know when to cut the toxic relationship off. So if you've made an attempt to set boundaries and it hasn't worked, a person hasn't changed and they keep blowing through your boundaries, then ultimately you're going to have to stop hanging around with that person. You're just going to have to break off that relationship. In fact, God told the Israelites in Deuteronomy chapter 7, he said, don't intermarry with those people. He didn't say, don't intermarry with them until you start to get into idolatry. He said, just don't do it. Now, when I'm talking about that, I realize that toxic relationships might be within your own family. So I'm not saying get a divorce. I'm not saying you cut yourself off from your family. That's a different thing. That's a covenant relationship. But in ordinary relationships in life, sometimes we have to be willing to go that far, to cut someone off, for the sake of being able to fulfill our purpose in life to help other people pursue God. Now, let me just remind you that all of us have something toxic within us that's going to affect other people. It's not physical, it's spiritual. All of us have sin in our lives. The answer to that is God sent His Son into the world to forgive us our sins and give us new life. And when you come to Him, then He began to change your life from the inside out. So when we have to set boundaries with other people, approaching toxic people, we do that with some humility, knowing that we have some toxicity within ourselves. But it's important to do what we need to do in order to fulfill God's purposes in our lives.